On occasion, I run into a few spots that might have a few too many fish. A lot of times that can be, inshore you're catching too many grunts, or you're getting too many spot tail pinfish, just kind of annoying things. Or occasionally, if a season's closed and you're out deeper, you're getting too many red snapper. On this day, we were in about 100 feet. Beautiful day. We drive over the spot, and the depth finder is just a complete ball. We were going there trying to get mangrove snapper towards the end of the afternoon with an outgoing tide, something that would typically be pretty good for mangoes. And when we pull up, we see all these fish. I'm like, well, there's definitely mangoes down there, but I kind of had a feeling of what we were going to run into when it's too many. It's just the spot is nothing crazy. It's like a roll off rocky type bottom. Get some gags there, some yellowtails, some scamps, and a bunch of other stuff. So when we start fishing, immediately we start getting into lesser amberjack, barjacks. People call them all kinds of different stuff. Basically just smaller amberjack type fish that were literally eating everything we were dropping down to the bottom. So these things. We start chumming. You see a few mangoes. You drop a bait to them. These jacks right here were going and trying to eat everything you would drop. If you dropped no weight, you get a jack. If you dropped a jig head, you get a jack. You drop to the bottom, you get a jack. Vertical jig, jack. It was literally insane. Your bait wouldn't last more than a few seconds anytime you dropped. As we start chumming more, we get vermilion snapper up to the surface, or beeliners. It was absolutely crazy seeing just this gigantic swarm of everything coming up to the surface. But unfortunately, they were being so aggressive we couldn't get any mangoes. So I set the camera down. I was like, what's going down on the bottom here? And you could see from that show on the depth finder, the bottom was just covered in fish. You can see in the background a little bit. There's the roll-off. We were anchored up in front of it because I wanted the chum to go back to it. There's a lot of mangrove snapper as the camera goes down, a lot of vermilion snapper beeliners, but we could not get anything past the jacks. They were being too aggressive. Even tried dead baiting them. Just look at the amount of snapper, the mangrove snapper, the good ones, down on the bottom when the camera finally gets down there. So there's the vermilions. There's the jacks. There's the jacks. Tried dead baiting, which normally the jacks would avoid. Tried real heavy Spanish sardines. And then if you can see there in the background, big gag grouper. So a couple of the bigger baits we would drop down, we got big gags on. But this was in March, so they're out of season. Can't keep any of them. So at that point, I was just like, well, I'm going to send the camera down and see what's down there. I know there's a bunch of mangroves. We're not going to stay long. So we eventually just took off and moved after, I bring the camera back up and get some footage just for my own reference. And so I look at this later. I didn't even look at it at the time because we just kind of picked up and moved. And I was like, oh, my God, there's just an insane amount of fish there. Camera was down for probably about 20 minutes. Oh, we did hook also a big shark while we were sitting here. But as you can see, nice gag grouper, mangrove snapper. So just this show. So I run always zoom. This is a Garmin unit, and so you can have a split screen. This is top to bottom. At certain points, this cloud of fish was all the way to the top. So this, what you're seeing down on the bottom here, went pretty much all the way to the surface, which was just insane. So this is at a point when the camera is down at the bottom. So if you can see all these little dots, solid red dots, that's fish. And this is kind of what it translates into. If you wanted to send, squid or something down to the bottom, you might have been able to get some vermilion snapper, probably as many as you wanted. Not something we were interested in. We caught a few hogfish earlier in the day, fish and shrimp. So we're mainly just looking for the mangrove snapper to kind of to round out the box. So I'll skip ahead in the video a little bit. You kind of see, what's going on here just with the sheer amount of fish. It's pretty insane. Good thing about skipping through is you can, get kind of a feel of everything. So more big gag grouper, just kind of hanging out in the back. The gag grouper never really swim up to the camera. They're always kind of lurking. You can see right there, it's got a little darkness on the tail. That's when they get a little bigger, they get that darkness under the tail there. The one we caught was probably about 32 inches. I'm sure there were other even bigger ones down there. If I was going after a gag grouper, I would have sent down something bigger, like a beeliner. If you just let it sit right on the bottom, that would have been the way to get one, or a big pinfish, something the jacks couldn't even fit in their mouth. But we didn't really prepare for that. It's not something we wanted. So there's a gag that's smaller, actually swimming up to the camera a little bit, looking at it, kind of curious. But the main thing is just the amount of the mangrove snapper that were down on the bottom that we couldn't get chummed up. So gags, big school of gags in the back there. Might be hard to see from the quality of the video online once it gets shared. That's a big mangrove right there, if you could see that one. Let me just go back. The big mangroves, when they start to lose their color and just kind of all look white, and they lose that line behind the eye, that's when you know you're getting into big mangrove territory, the 22 plus inch fish. Scamp grouper right there, also good eating. A lot of times I'll get them on this spot if I'm using vertical jigs, like 60 grams. They seem to like the chartreuse and the pink. Love scamps. Not a chance of catching one on this day. You can see those jacks are just going everywhere around the camera. They're being the more aggressive fish. The best bites I've had there's another big gag there, for mangroves at this spot are kind of those late evening slack tides when you can get them way up in the column. We did see them come up a couple times, but just no chance of really getting them. So big gags. Lots of mangoes. So that's about as close as a gag ever really gets to the camera for me right there. So you can see a broadside. It's a nice one. And I think he was actually, yeah, he was. So we did drop a big bait there. And if you could see him kind of nose down to it, is a strip of bonita. So there's a strip of bonita. He nosed down to it, looked at it. And so what he'll do is he'll come back and look at it again. And the interesting thing is everything else is ignoring it. I think they were kind of more keened in on the stuff dropping since we were chumming a little bit, and not even really caring about that strip of bonita. So that's most likely the gag that we ended up catching, because we did get it on it was either a sardine or a strip of bonita that was sitting right on the bottom. So he goes away, and at some point he does come back. I'm just going to kind of skip through the video here. So there you can see a gag, swarms of snapper. Lots of fish. It's not often you are getting too many fish, but if they're not the right fish, not someplace you want to stay. The more I watch this, it's crazy how many gag grouper are around this spot. Gags for me have been tougher in recent years, just because I like to run a little deeper. But every time I run deeper, I end up running into a lot of red snapper, so I don't get nearly as many gags. If I stay around that 80 to 100 foot mark, that's where I'll get more big gags, the 30 plus inchers, and that 50 foot range. You'll get a lot of legal size fish year round. It used to be mainly a wintertime fisher. I just think they don't really go as deep anymore because of the red snapper and the competition that they see. But lots of fish everywhere. And you also notice you don't see a whole lot of grunts when you get to 100 feet, which is nice. That's a big mangrove right there. You notice that lack of the color behind the eye. So here's the vermilion snapper beeliner swarm kind of coming in, looking around. You'll see this a lot in like 120, 130 feet when you get over some hard bottom spots. And when they get aggressive, they can definitely run you out of an area. If you see giant shows of what you call bait when you're offshore, a lot of times in that 120 plus foot range, it's these vermilion snapper, which are good because I think them they kind of bring in everything else with them. They're definitely a lower totem pole, lower food chain fish, and everything will kind of follow them around. But as you can see, it's getting thicker and thicker with the amount of vermilion snapper. If this was lane snapper, which I've seen schools of them like this before, that would be good too. But vermilions, I didn't really want to sit there and clean a whole bunch of 11-inch vermilion snapper. So, but you can see the mangroves kind of mixing in with them. There's a triggerfish that swam by earlier. It's pretty insane, just the sheer amount of fish that were on this spot. So there's the jacks that wanted everything. And here's an interesting moment. So I said we hooked a shark, broke it off below the boat. I think that was kind of the final moment when we hooked the shark. We were dropping a few bigger baits trying to get away from the jacks. So you'll see that shark come cruising in right here. Beeliners clear out. Bam! Swam right into my camera. Run that back for you one time just to see it again. I've had sharks come plenty close to the camera before, but this is the first time any of them have ever swam directly into it. The first time I watched that, I just about jumped out of my seat because I was not expecting to see a shark swim right into the lens like that. And that's a giant mangrove snapper back there. I have got a few red snapper on the spot, not many, only 100 feet. They don't seem to come in that shallow as often. A couple years ago, we would get one regularly in 60, 70 feet when we were red snapper fishing. But about 2019, 2020, they all seem to start hanging deeper again. But there's a school of gag grouper in the back now over there. Just the vermilion snapper, insane. Looking right into the camera. I want to get to one point here where the vermilions kind of clear out, and then there's just this cloud of mangrove snapper. If I can find it. Okay, it's coming up here. So look at that. That is a cloud of mangroves, which is pretty insane. Basically, the amount of vermilion snapper that were just on the screen is replaced with mainly mangrove snapper. Not something you see every day, but I think the spot is just so big and long. It's just a big long rock pile basically, and so these fish can go up and down it and cruise all around it. But it's a bunch of darker mangrove snapper. Usually, the darker the mangrove snapper, the harder the bottom. So these fish, I think, were on the bottom and kind of came out for a moment. Some of the bigger mangrove snapper you'll see are pretty light, and they don't necessarily hang around. I think because they're more of an apex fish, they'll get out on the sand a little bit and get some more white in them. And the camera rolls over at 18 minutes, so I end up getting more footage. So I'll just run through real quick. So as you can see, the grouper never really leave. Excuse me. Grouper never really leave. The mangrove snapper are just kind of hanging out all around. But the jacks. The jacks. Scamp grouper. Just all kinds of life. So points are, those clouds of fish that go away. But they just kept coming in and out, varieties. Mangrove snapper, gag grouper living in harmony. Which is always interesting to see, because sometimes if you hook a little mangrove snapper and you reel it in slow, these gags will turn on it in an instant. They will eat it. So there's some of the darker mangroves. The bottom was back there. We went too far. I dropped the camera off the front of the boat every time I send it down, just because usually if we're fishing current, it's going back and the camera will stay out of the way. So the back of the boat was edged up to the spot fairly well. But those grouper never really leave, and most people think you got to get right in the rocks to catch them. They'll come to you if there's craziness like this. But wild. So at some point I start cranking it in. Oh, there's a shark again. Cruising around. Probably when we started using chunks of bonita. The shark's definitely keying on that scent. So I always like to drop the camera one time before I reel it up, just because it usually kicks up sand, and that might bring in a few other curious fish. A lot of people think making a lot of noise on the bottom isn't good when you're bottom fishing. I don't mind it. I think kind of gets the attention brought to you. So you can see as I'm reeling it up, the jacks kind of follow it. Just because anything that was moving, they were keying right on. And so this is up in the water column. You can see even up in the column, there's a lot of fish. And when we were looking down below the boat, it looked like an aquarium just with the sheer amount of everything you were seeing. So up in the column, there's all the jacks. That's why we couldn't get anything past them. Even if you try dropping heavier weights, they would eat it on the drop. So I just thought people would be interested to see. Sometimes you get too many fish, and this was one of those occasions. So if you see a show like this and you're not quite getting the quality that you want, it doesn't mean it's not there. You're just unfortunate, and time to move on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, always feel free to subscribe. Like my videos. I love the comments. I try to reply to them as many as I can. If you got any questions, feel free to reach out. I will definitely reply if I can. Take care.